I'm at a loss on how to start this video out, so I'm just gonna... Yeah. A while ago, I made a top 10 favorite and least favorite JRPG protagonist video because it's a topic that I see floating around every now and then, and it annoys me. But antagonists? As of making this, I don't remember watching any content on this topic myself, and I refrained from looking it up beforehand, so this is all fresh, baby. I have no idea what the common consensus is for a lot of these characters I'm about to talk about. In my JRPG protagonist video, I complain about how many of them fall into the anime sword boy theme, and are very copy-paste from game to game. For antagonists, it's not quite the same in my experience, as they are written to be more suited to whatever is happening in the story. Sure, there are some recurring villain tropes of course, such as the sympathetic bad guy, the brooding rival of the main protagonist, or "this isn't even my true final form." What makes an antagonist good are several things, most of which are dependent on the plot. You want their goals and motivations to make sense within the story. You want them to be a looming threat to your characters and you as the player. And you want their presence to be impactful in one way or another. An antagonist doesn't have to be likable. In fact, a villain that makes you say, "I hate this guy," might be doing something right, because you're supposed to want to take him down. However, you might also say, "I hate this guy," because he's poorly written, or annoyingly evil for the sake of filling the obligatory evil role, or just insufferable for one reason or another to the point where you just want him off the screen by any means necessary. This countdown will be similar to how I did my top 10 JRPG protagonists video. There aren't many other rules to this list, other than this isn't just about villains. They have to be the main antagonist, or in cases where there are multiple antagonists, they have to be significant to the main story. I will also take their boss fights into consideration, but only to a degree. Oh, and I will be talking very heavy spoilers, obviously, even more so than my previous video, so I'll give fair warning ahead of time. And because it's about villains, this video may delve into some sensitive subject matter. Prepare yourselves. Let's get into it. I don't know if this video will have nearly as many controversial choices compared to my protagonist one, but we're starting off with a character that I don't think anyone will disagree with when I say that they are the most underwhelming and uninteresting villain in the Xenosaga trilogy, Sergius the 17th. Basically, this guy can be summed up by Evil Space Pope, and he takes the role of main antagonist for much of the last act of Xenosaga Episode 2, but every time he's on screen it's like, yeah, get on with it, old man, which isn't true for literally any other villain in this story. The most unfortunate thing here is that it wouldn't have been that difficult to make him more interesting. Give him some more backstory, give him a more striking personality, give him a design that's more than old religious man, though changing his design is the least warranted, as you'd be surprised at just how deep the backstories of some of the series' most basic looking characters go. He's also technically the last boss in the game, and his fight is a painful one, though that's mostly due to Xenosaga 2 having a combat system that's painful from start to finish. That, and the other main reason he isn't higher on the list, is that he's outshined by everyone else in the game rather than being utterly terrible on his own. He at least fits his role, but still, he's just a prime example of missed potential.
Exit the stage. Your act is over. No! I am all power!
Starting off my favorites, we have Pokemon. Pokemon is kind of a weird series because the main antagonists of the story usually aren't the true final bosses. That's usually reserved for whoever the champion of the Pokemon League is. In Generation 1, your rival Blue makes for a difficult adversary every time you come across him, and he ends up taking the champion's seat right before you do, making him the final and hardest battle in the game by a long shot. But he's not really an antagonist in the traditional sense. That role is taken by Team Rocket, a criminal organization that can be described as a sort of mafia within the Kanto region. They use Pokemon basically as slaves or weapons to do their bidding, and are ruthless compared to any other villainous team that have come up in future games. And that's part of what makes them such good antagonists. It makes you want to take them down just out of a sense of moral imperative. There's two key characters that make Team Rocket even more interesting than just being a petty gang of thugs though. Giovanni, who is the leader, and a powerful Pokemon trainer in his own right, manages to take over the largest corporate headquarters in Saffron City, and in a bizarre twist, is actually the final gym leader of Viridian City, which implies that there may be more corruption ingrained in this region than meets the eye. In Generation 2, we have Silver, who takes the role of a rival character, but unlike Blue, acts in a way befitting of a villainous antagonist, yet seems to have a very deep-seated vendetta against Team Rocket. In the remakes of Gold and Silver, we learn that he is actually the son of Giovanni, and his abusive behavior is a result of how his father treated him. Kind of sad to think about, but over the course of the game, he redeems himself a bit and becomes one of the strongest trainers in the region. Pretty unusual for the Mafia to be the main storyline element that links these two generations together more than anything. Unfortunately, the Pokemon Company will probably never do something that interesting again given their current track record of making every villainous team a complete joke. We'll get to that. Don't worry. Can I rant about R4 from the Neptunia series a bit? Because like Sergius, wow, never thought I'd be comparing these two, but here we are. She's another example of missed potential that gets outshined by every other character in the series. She's dull, humorless, and just an uptight bitch every time she appears, and offers nothing in the way of entertainment whenever she's on screen. And for some reason, R4 is the most recurring villain in the series. Neptunia is a parody series about console wars, and each of the main characters represents one of the major companies: Sega, Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft. R4 is a reference to R4, an old Nintendo DS cartridge used for pirating games, which is an irrelevant piece of hardware, or in the Japanese version, a reference to a similar device for pirating games as far back as the Super Famicom. Yet, R4 is still the villain in 2023's Neptunia Sisters vs. Sisters. Why? Like, she's supposed to represent game piracy in general now, I guess, but it's unfitting in the current continuity that has jokes about mobile games and modern stuff like that. But if she's supposed to represent the general black market of gaming or whatever, you'd think she'd have a more entertaining personality because there's so much to work with there. Instead, the main characters just make fun of her the entire time she's on screen while she has nothing good or funny to come back with. Ever. Oh well. It's not like we're supposed to care all that much in a silly parody series, right? Is what I would say, but this series regularly betrays that notion more often than you'd expect, with something incredibly clever, heartwarming, or compelling in some way. Like the next entry.
Then, what's your objective? Are you trying to steal my spot as the protagonist?
Mega Dimension Destructor R4. Well, now that you mention it, taking your spotlight sounds like a brilliant idea.
Hey, did you hear that, Nep Jr.? Mega Dimension Destructor R4?
You shouldn't laugh, Neptune. Not when she's so serious.
Ironically, there's another Neptunia villain who sort of has a similar fate of being made fun of a lot. Ray writes from Hyperdimension Neptunia V. Spoiler warning. Like I said, Neptunia is a series that cleverly portrays the gaming console wars through cute and funny anime girls and their ridiculous shenanigans. In the Ultra Dimension, which is set in the past, don't ask, Ray is the former goddess of a nation called Tari, obviously being a reference to Atari, and her nation's downfall ended in a violent revolt, which is an allusion to the video game market crash during the Atari 2600 and 5200's lifetime. Following the resurgence of video games thanks to other companies like Sega and Nintendo, people look back on Atari as a failure. And as a parallel in the game, Ray is constantly teased, belittled, and made to do menial work despite being the leader of the Seven Sages, antagonists of this story that seek to take back the world of game industry by getting Ray's power back. But in the meantime, Ray is presented as weak, timid, and overall useless despite being their leader, and it's often pretty hilarious. So instead of getting her shares back herself, she and the Seven Sages manipulate the new CPU Pishi into doing their bidding, but fail. Eventually, she gets her old power back towards the end of the game, and it's a bit striking to see her do a complete 180 and turn into a savage, insane psychopath. Not only that, the Present Dimensions Ray at full strength becomes arguably the most powerful character in the entire series, making the stakes of this game's story much greater than the previous two. It's up to the Past Dimensions Ray to gather up some self-esteem, some self-control, come to terms with her failures, and help everyone else prevent Present Ray from causing another disaster, like what happened to her nation of Tari, or worse. It's admittedly not the greatest story ever, but I thoroughly enjoyed it, much more than the first two Neptunia games, and Ray's character was a big part of that. Also, bonus points to this game for one of the Seven Sages, Ananideth, who is easily the funniest villain in the entire series. Too bad he isn't a recurring one. Please come back.
Now then, show me your throes of death, and know that none shall cry for you. Because this entire world will disappear alongside you! I won't allow it. We will protect the game industry with every fiber of our being.
I have to admit, I liked Pokemon X and Y a lot more than most fans do, and that's including the story. But part of the story can piss right off, and that's everything involving Lysander and his Team Flare. Firstly, let's get the easy part out of the way. Team Flare are pathetic pushovers as in-game enemies, with the admins only having 2 Pokemon each, making them one of the easiest villainous teams to take down in the entire series. They make up for it a little by having more variety than some previous teams, but that's about all the credit I can give them. Second, Lysander. Can I just say that Lysander is one of the most ridiculous looking major characters in the entire series? I mean, what the hell? I cringed just having to look this guy up to refresh my memory on what his motives were because it was so forgettable and uninteresting that I must have blocked everything this guy said out of my memory. Basically, Lysander dreams of a beautiful world unspoiled by human intervention. Why does he want this? What made him this way? Well, it's not exactly explained all that well in-game, really. We barely get to learn anything about his backstory or anything like that, just that he became misanthropic due to his perception of humanity being stupid or something. So he wants to kill everyone with a 3,000-year-old superweapon. Okay, guy. When it finally comes time, we get to battle him 3 times, and his team is exactly the same every time, with only 4 Pokemon. 2 of which are the same as a team leader from a previous game that's a far better character than he is. For a guy obsessed with eternal beauty, his team doesn't really reflect that as well as it could have too. Everything in the story that happens involving Lysander and Team Flare is outshined immensely by someone else entirely, a guy with very little screen time comparatively, and I won't spoil that here because it's one of my favorite story moments in the entire series, and you should see it for yourself. But it just makes the disappointment that is Team Flare all the more painful. I really ripped into Golden Sun pretty hard in my Protagonist video, but I do still love the series. Well, the first 2 games, but still. And the series has one of the best examples of how to create antagonists that shine in sheer intimidation factor alone. In the first Golden Sun, we have Saturos, Minardi, and Alex. Spoiler warning. Your first encounter with Saturos and Minardi is at the beginning of the game, right after a disaster befalls the village of Vale, and they run into your main characters Isaac and Garrett, and brutally wipe the floor with them just to shut them up about spotting them in the village. Right off the bat, you can tell these 2 are dangerous as hell. Later on, they take Jenna and Kraden as hostages to use as leverage against you throughout the game, and this is where Alex makes his first appearance, which just shows how the odds are even more against you than you might have thought. However, Alex doesn't really take the spotlight as an antagonist, and you never get to fight him, so we'll focus on Saturos and Minardi. Throughout the rest of the game, you only encounter them twice more, as they are always many steps ahead of your party, making it feel like you're constantly fighting a battle you cannot win. And it feels like that even more when Saturos decides to take on your entire party in a battle atop Mercury Lighthouse after they achieve their goal there. Saturos, fighting alone at a significantly lower power level due to the lighthouse's water element weakening him, is still one of the most difficult boss fights in the entire game, also with one of the best boss themes ever, just saying. Then, atop Venus Lighthouse, you have to fight both of them as the game's finale, and after you beat them, they turn into a dragon? Okay. Still, it was pretty epic, but even after you kill them, there's more. Learning a little more about them and what was actually going on in this world in the second game makes them much more interesting than your typical run-of-the-mill JRPG villains because, well, let's just say that even though they were the antagonists and their methods were not exactly wholesome, they were ultimately doing the right thing. A very interesting twist that I was not expecting, I have to admit. If I even say the name of the game, you'll know exactly where I'm going with this if you've played it. Final Fantasy X. Spoiler warning. Throughout most of the game, your main antagonist appears to be Sin, a massive kaiju-like whale monster that destroys everything. A lot. Like damn. A lot of people die in this game because of Sin, and it's heartbreaking to witness. Going on a journey just to kill this thing would have been a worthwhile endeavor on its own, to be honest. But the writers had other ideas in mind. On the other hand, we have Seymour, a powerful summoner who, early on, appears to be on your side, but is actually quite nasty, which befits his character design and makes for another pretty good antagonist. As for Sin, it turns out that's what Tidus' father Jecht had become 10 years ago, and based on the way he treated his son, you'd think that it makes him the real antagonist of the game. So who is it actually? Well, it's technically not Sin itself, as that is just a vessel of destruction powered by the Aeon that Jecht became. And it's also not Seymour. Even though he gets in your way many times throughout the story, he tries to take control very late in the game and become the next Sin, but fails. It's also not Jecht himself, as like I said, he became the one that powers Sin, but only after becoming the final Aeon in order to defeat it. The real main antagonist of Final Fantasy X is this thing. Yu Yevon. A mindless parasite that takes over the Aeons to create Sin anew every 10 years or so. How anticlimactic can you get? Like seriously, you have to do some serious digging to understand what this thing actually is, and to sum it up, it's the leader of Xanarkand from 1,000 years ago, who we never get to see or learn about, who created Sin using the power of people's dreams to stop a war with a technologically superior Bevelle. He would continue to rampage the world for a millennia until the events of Final Fantasy X, and ends with one of the most dull final boss fights in any JRPG. First, he possesses every Aeon unit has to summon, so you have to kill them all yourself, which, depending on how much you've done to train your characters, can be pathetically easy, as well as mind-numbingly tedious due to having to watch all the summon animations you've already seen a billion times at this point. Then you have to destroy Yu Yevon yourself in what's supposed to be a symbolic fight, as you always have auto-revive on all of your characters so you can't die. It's also just tedious, unless again you've trained your characters and kill it in one hit. I'm not even against symbolic battles like this, which you'll see later in this list, but this one was just lame as hell and very poorly executed. Even though it makes sense in its universe, Yu Yevon still is probably the weakest link in what's otherwise an amazing story in an awesome game.
This is your world now.
The next entry in my favorite antagonists is from the Valkyrie Profile series, so beware if you have any intention of playing them, as merely saying the villain's name is a spoiler, especially for the second game. So skip to the next entry if you don't want to be spoiled on it. I've only played part of Valkyrie Profile 1, but I loved the hell out of Valkyrie Profile 2, including the main villain, Lizard Valeth. All I know is that Lizard was a mage who was fascinated by the dark arts in the first game. But in the second game, he appears seemingly out of nowhere to help Alicia and her party escape from Tapan Castle. Turns out he had sent himself back in time after the events of the first game using a time travel device in Tapan to conjure up a plan to achieve his true goal of godhood and capturing the Valkyrie Lenneth. Why? He's basically infatuated with her in a very weird way, and will stop at nothing to achieve making her his own. He's an ambitious schemer, very intelligent and manipulative, a perfect fit for a Machiavellian style of antagonist. One advantage of not playing the first game beforehand was that this completely blindsided me when Lizard was revealed to be the villain. He lays low, being an active supporter of your party for the first half of the game rather than a hindrance, which is unique to say the least. He's very calm and rational, often diffusing any tension that may arise between members, but he eventually goes as far as stealing Gungnir, the fabled weapon of the god Odin, and creating a distortion in the fabric of reality with his newfound power, all just to lure Lenneth to him. There, you'll have to take him down in one of the hardest final boss fights I've had to deal with in a JRPG. It was a satisfying, epic, and honestly bonkers final few acts, but I adore it to no end. Also, Lizard is voiced by Liam O'Brien, who's like the only English voice actor I care about, so he gets bonus points, just saying.
That low, stupid, ignorant human princess steals my dear Lenneth and throws my painstakingly prepared history into chaos and disarray. You will pay.
For the most part, the villains of the Trails series... Oh, wait, Trails. Hold on. There we go. The villains of the Trails series tend to be among the most interesting characters, but there's one guy that I just can't with. I don't know what the deal is with Japanese games and redhead villains, but Duke Cayenne is another one of those guys that I just don't want to look at, although I think it's just the shit-eating smug-ass grin he has on most of the time. He's just a stereotypical noble blood villain that wants to have his noble bloodline rule over everything because reasons. Unlike other villains in this series, he's not charismatic in the slightest. He gets what he wants purely through the power of money, and you never get to fight him. The latter being very fitting for his character at least, because he makes everyone else do all the work for him. He is so goddamn lame. Every other villain in the series, except for Gilbert, is dangerous, enigmatic, intimidating, manipulative, and or powerful in some way or another that really makes them a force to be reckoned with. Duke Cayenne could have been better despite the I'm just gonna pay everyone to do everything for me role he's meant to fill. Considering the person we meet in Cold Steel 3 he's related to, you'd think he'd have at least some degree of interesting things going for him, but no. Oh, and at the end of Cold Steel 2, it turns out he was just being used by other better antagonists in the game because of course he was. Then he just gets locked up for good. A fitting, underwhelming end for an underwhelming antagonist.
Why reveal this now? What could you possibly have to gain from professing your allegiance to a dead man?
He would gain nothing, which is why it's rather fortunate I'm very much alive.
Ah!
Sticking with Trails, we have the two main antagonists of Trails in the Sky second chapter. If you haven't played up to this point, and I highly recommend you do, here's your spoiler warning. The first Trails in the Sky game is kinda like a tour of the country of Liberl, and we only get a taste of what these villains are capable of right at the final act of the game. A coup to overthrow Liberl's royal army by the nation's prodigal colonel, Alan Richard, by obtaining something of great power called the Aureole, is the main conflict of the game, but it turns out it was all a ruse set up by the real mastermind, Georg Weissman, just to unlock the seal on the Aureole. Along with him, we also have Luve, who acts as Weissman's right-hand man. These two make for some of the best antagonists the series has to offer, and they are both wildly different from each other. Luve is related to one of the main characters, Joshua, as both of them were from the same village of Hamel that was destroyed 10 years ago, an event that triggered the 100 Days War. This manifested a strong darkness in both of their hearts, and both would end up joining the Ouroboros Society and eventually work for Weissman. Luve became a master swordsman and wanted to use Ouroboros' means to his own ends of getting back at the people and politicians that would cause such a tragedy. He makes for an extremely powerful adversary with some of the most difficult boss fights in the entire series, and once you defeat him in Trails in the Sky second chapter, finally gives closure to Joshua, who's been battling his own demons as well. Weissman, on the other hand, he's like the cunning serpent, willing to do anything and everything to achieve his goals, going so far that even his fellow villains of the Ouroboros Society decry his actions. Interestingly, he was a member of the Septian Church before joining them, which is where he learned about the stigma and the Septarians, which he became obsessively fascinated by, going as far as orchestrating the Hamel massacre in order to start the war that would uncover the leads to finding the Septarian of space, the Aureole. The church caught wind of his activities and branded him a heretic as a result, which comes with the death penalty. He also has a very interesting special ability that forces people to be unable to remember his face, giving him the moniker, the Faceless. It's ironic that these two work together, considering that Weissman was the one who instigated the destruction of Louvet's home and family, and Louvet, being the sharp one he is, always suspected that was the case, but never had proof, until Weissman admits it towards the very end of the game, where Louvet finally turns on him using the sword given to him by the Grandmaster of Ouroboros, almost as if they wanted it to happen. These two characters' dynamic and their wildly different motivations and behaviors, along with the rest of the diverse enforcers you meet from Ouroboros from this game, really makes them so much more interesting than your typical group of villains. When Weissman is finally cornered by Kevin Graham, a dominion of the Septian Church, the rest of Ouroboros do not even come to his aid, with Campanella literally just watching him die. It was an awesome setup for the future of this series that really showed us what an enigmatic and unpredictable force Ouroboros truly is. Alright, back to normal. Time to shit on Pokemon again. I'm just gonna say it. Team Magma and Team Aqua are fucking stupid. Basically, both of them are opposing sides of environmentalist hippies that want to fix the world. One of them wants to expand the land, the other wants to expand the ocean. Anyone with a single brain cell to rub against itself would be able to realize that this would be a bad idea for everyone, the environment, civilization, and many types of Pokemon. Yet somehow there were enough morons in the region of Hoenn to join the cause for both of them. Say goodbye, my suspension of disbelief. Although, with the way real-life environmentalists are, never mind that. I get that this is just a kids series or whatever, but I actually prefer kids to have games with good stories in them that actually engage the player and not treat them like they're dumb. And it's pretty obvious that the developers thought this story was dumb in retrospect, because the remakes Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, this was heavily retconned and rewritten to actually make some sense. Now both of them reject the notion of humans and Pokemon coexisting, with Team Magma wanting to expand the land to create a utopia of human civilization, and Team Aqua wanting to expand the ocean to wipe out human civilization for the sake of Pokemon. Despite these improvements to the story, it's still fucking stupid. To add to all this, both of these teams are absolute garbage when it's time to battle them, as they all have a very limited selection of Pokemon that are very weak, and their visual themes of fire and water give away what types they are weak to before the battle even begins. And the final fight with them is pathetic as well, with their leaders only having 3 Pokemon each, or 4 in the remakes. Guess you could say it's fitting given how incompetent they are. If there's one type of character I tend to gravitate towards more than is probably normal, it's the tortured soul, characters who have been put through the worst of it, who then project all the terrible things that have happened to them onto everyone around them. The Art and Ellico series has 2 examples of this, and, spoiler warning again, as even mentioning their names is considered a spoiler, so skip to the next entry if you plan on trying these games out. In the first game, the main threat are these strange creatures called viruses that appear to be like holograms, as the main cast can't seem to do anything to them. It turns out these were created by Mir, a Ravatel who's been sealed inside the tower where the game is set for hundreds of years. Long story short, Mir was created without emotions in order to use stronger song magic at the behest of her masters, but she began to develop emotions over time anyway, and created a song called Harmonious. Her creators rejected this and considered her defective, and locked her away in the Silver Horn, a place where she was forced to use her magic to do their bidding. Eventually, she would resent humans so much that she hacked the tower and started a massive war with them until she was sealed away. Hundreds of years later, Misha, who had been maintaining the seal on Mir for a long time, learned Harmonious and sang it back to her in the finale, finally quelling her hatred and putting it all to an end. In the second game, it isn't revealed who the true antagonist is until very late in the game, when we start to learn more about Infel, a character who appears to be the mind guardian of Cloche. Turns out, she has been playing the long game for around 400 years in order to manifest all the conditions to erase humanity, and ascend them all into a collective unconscious via a song called Sublimation. It's a long story, but back then, she failed to create the promised land Metaphalica with the people of Metafals, and her beloved partner Ninesha was killed before her eyes, making her lose faith in humanity completely, until the new maidens Cloche and Luca confront her and prove her wrong, in a culmination of everyone's efforts, including the crucial aid from Mir from the first game. Both of these antagonists are similar on the surface, tragic characters who have been tormented for years, full of resentment towards humanity, which is why I'm putting them both here in the same entry. Obviously, their circumstances and methods are wildly different, but both serve a similar purpose: to make the stories of these two games far more engaging on an emotional level.
Emotional damage!
The series just wouldn't be the same without them. So I have to admit to a bit of an unguilty pleasure. I enjoyed the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy. I like to describe it as wankery in story form because it's complicated, all over the place, and everything is designed in a very over-the-top stylish way, which is kind of expected of Squeenix. You'd think that would inspire the design of the series' villains too, right? Right? Oh no. Oh god, no. We're fighting the Pope again. So you're telling me, after all the absolutely insane things that happen, with all the wild and outlandish monsters and constructs they designed for this game, we have to fight generic-looking old-ass Pope guy again? We already did that in Xenosaga 2 earlier in this countdown, but at least that one had the bonus of being in space! But this isn't the villain's true identity. We'll get to that. He assumes the guise of shiny fantasy Pope Galenth Daisley in order to manipulate the people against the l'Cie, people who are given strange powers and visions of a mission from the gods. One such mission being to destroy the pseudo-utopia where everybody lives, Cocoon, which is also Daisley's ultimate goal. In order to do that, he needs the l'Cie to become stronger through adversity. Then he'll be able to get them to destroy Orphan, the being that sustains Cocoon. Are you following? If not, don't worry, it makes more sense if you play the game. Maybe. Anyway, the reason he wants to destroy Cocoon is because he's actually Barthandelus, a fal'Cie, or divine being who doesn't want to serve humanity anymore, and wants to be reunited with the gods, and you know what, fuck all this. What really matters is how this guy was just a dull character and that he just sucked the life out of every scene. Even when he is in his fal'Cie form, compared to many of the other crazy things we see in this game, he's still underwhelming. Not to mention his goal of testing your l'Cie party means you have to fight him 3 times. And I don't remember any of these fights being particularly noteworthy or difficult from a gameplay perspective, but it's been a long time. After the final battle with him, he gets assimilated into Orphan, the thing he wanted to destroy to begin with, and you have to fight Orphan as the final boss instead. Really stole his thunder there, I guess, which is quite fitting for a lame character like this.
Slaughter and salvation. 2 irreconcilable focuses we bore, yet bound were we in a cocoon prison, impervious to our power. And so we thank you for granting us our longed-for birth.
You know what? Let's talk about a good Final Fantasy villain for a change. Ready? Yeah, number 4 is Sephiroth. Yeah, I've heard all the totally not biased contrarian hindsight criticisms of this guy as a villain, and some of them may have some valid arguments, but I don't give a damn, son. Maybe it'll sound weird coming from a cringy neckbeard in his 30s, but I've always thought Sephiroth was just cool as hell.
And I'm tired of pretending it's not.
For some context, I never actually played Final Fantasy VII around the time it came out, but one of my friends showed me the game, which got me a bit interested in the series, and Sephiroth's design always stuck out to me and appealed very heavily to my inner edgelord. Just one look at him and you know he's not just a cool edgy villain, but that he will fuck your shit up effortlessly if you cross him, and then haunt you for eternity and call you gay or something. I never got back into Final Fantasy VII until like 2016, when I got a used PSP that happened to have the game installed on it. So I decided, screw it, let's do this shit finally, and I thoroughly enjoyed it from start to finish. I have not played any of the other spin-off Final Fantasy VII things, nor the remake, and I refuse to do so until it's actually fucking finished, so we'll only be talking about the original. There's a lot I could go into about Sephiroth's complicated history, but he shines the most when you finally start learning about him in-game, about how he was a secret experimental super soldier made from the alien Genova's DNA, about how learning from this drove him to insanity, about what he's capable of, not just as a super soldier, but as someone who fused his being with the magical will of the planet. The more you learn, the more it feels like he's always watching you, like an omnipresent ghost that could strike at any moment, especially considering Genova can manifest itself as a clone of Sephiroth anywhere around the world. And then, he strikes, and there's nothing you can do about it. Not until the end of the game at least, where you finally get to take him down in a very epic final boss fight that, honestly by today's standards, is pretty over-the-top ridiculous, but still. And his infamous final boss theme, which I never fully appreciated until I played through the story myself, perfectly encapsulates his powerful, madness-driven presence and desire to achieve godhood to erase the humanity that he believes wronged him and the world of Final Fantasy VII. I literally got writer's block for 2 days because I didn't even want to think about this guy, let alone write a script for him, because he's just so damn boring. And I didn't want to see his ugly ass ever again either. If there's one thing that was really disappointing about the otherwise very fun Xenoblade Chronicles X, it was the story. Spoiler warning. Tons of unanswered questions, a cliffhanger ending that still hasn't been addressed, kind of like some other franchise I complain about a lot. And one of its worst aspects, its villains. This tub of alien lard Luxar is the main villain.
He's fat!
You don't even see this guy until chapter 8 out of 12, with barely any screen time until the very end, and when he is on screen, it's like, fuck, go away. Unless there was something more planned for this story, all we know is that he and his faction want to destroy humanity because of a prophecy that we still don't really know much about because there's so much this game doesn't explain because they left it on a cliffhanger with no continuation in sight, and just thinking about this game is frustrating sometimes. But because this game has a lot of plot points that aren't explained, you could dismiss Luxar as evil bad alien guy and you wouldn't be too far off. The few moments we get to learn anything about him are so lacking that he may as well not exist, and because he has so little screen time, there's barely any build up towards his boss fight, and his fight is...
He's ugly, brother.
He finally gets the spotlight and it's quickly robbed halfway through it by another character who's more likable and at least somewhat more interesting, though that's about all the credit I'll give this game's characters. We'll see if this ever gets resolved, but given Nintendo's track record with abandoning their franchises, coupled with the series' current obsession with shonen bullshit, I'm not getting my hopes up anytime soon.
You traitorous scum. What happened to our bargain? Do you humans have no principles at all?
Principles? You deal with a traitor, you really shouldn't be surprised when you get stabbed in the back!
There's one game that I really did not expect to find one of my favorite villains, and that's Final Fantasy XIII-2. This game's story is admittedly kind of a clusterfuck just like the previous 13, but also with time traveling and multiverse timelines or whatever the hell happened. I could hardly remember most of the series details until I looked it up for a refresher, but the one thing I remembered the most was that Caius Ballad was damn near the perfect antagonist for this type of story. Spoiler warning. Another tortured soul driven to the depths of despair by being blessed with the power of the goddess Etro's heart to protect Yule, a seeress who is able to see the visions of the future at the eventual and inevitable cost of her life. Etro's heart allows him to protect her for eternity, as Yule reincarnates at some point after every time she dies from these visions, and having to witness this over and over again pushed Caius over the edge. Instead, he wants to use the heart of Etro to create a timeline where Yule's life is spared at any cost, or, failing that, destroy the timeline altogether. Throughout the game, Sarah and Noel try to resolve strange phenomena across several alternate timelines called time paradoxes. These were all created by Caius to manifest the conditions needed to destroy everything and put a stop to what he perceives as needless suffering. Needless to say, these powers coupled with the fact that he has around a millennium of experience mean that Caius is an extremely powerful adversary, as he goes toe-to-toe with Lightning at the beginning after she becomes Valhalla's guardian. At one point in the game when you fight him, he appears to kill both Sarah and Noel, your two main characters, though this was just a means of sending them into the void. His seemingly endless and diverse powers, coupled with his loathing of existence and suicidal tendencies, make him a scary antagonist. Adaptable, menacing, unpredictable, and yet, I still found it easy to empathize with him, and just wanted him to be able to find peace at the end of it all. He's such a tragic character that it's easy to put all the terrible things he's about to do in the back of your mind while you watch the story play out. When you finally catch up to him for the final showdown, you get what's easily the hardest mandatory boss fight using this battle system, and it's no contest. I had to really pull out everything I had to make it work, and it was still a test of patience and perseverance. Despite winning against him, Caius still has the last say, forcing Noel to destroy the heart of Etro within him, which in turn kills the goddess Etro and unleashes chaos upon the world. 13-2 made up for many of 13's shortcomings for me, becoming one of my favorites in this series thanks to all of its improvements and incredible moments, especially with Caius. He also has the best character theme out of any character on this list, that fuses sorrow, anger, doom, and dark majesty into an amazing vocal orchestral piece. And lastly, he also gets bonus points for being voiced by Liam O'Brien. Totally biased.
Time is our great obsession. Who has not dreamed of returning to the past, of changing the future? Imagine the power to see how our choices affect our lives and then return to undo them. Endless possibilities. Imagine the freedom to cross time and journey through the ages. The freedom to change the past and bend history to your will. What would you do if you had that power? Could you eradicate the mistakes of history and build a perfect future? Or would you be subject to fate and be swept down the river of time, powerless to change your course? Come with me. Let me show you your fate.
The more I think about Disgaea 5, the less I like it. Don't get me wrong, I still had fun with the game because of all of its features and all that, and still put hundreds of hours into it. But damn, considering it also appeared on my top 10 least favorite protagonists, it's gotta be the weakest in the series story-wise, and its main villain, Void Dark, is such a lame character. I don't really have a problem with his design at least. In fact, I actually kinda liked it, but Void Dark? What kind of name even is that? It's not even anything out of the ordinary for this series either, but characters with names like this are usually treated as a joke, and I certainly treat this guy as a joke. They made him so comically over-the-top evil to the point of absurdity, randomly killing off his minions on a whim, enslaving netherworlds and destroying everything opposed to him. So what made him this way? Spoiler warning. Basically, anime tropes. The sister complex. God damn it. That's what this story is really about? For those who don't know, a sister complex is a trope where a character, usually an older brother, is overprotective and obsessive towards their little sister, and occasionally goes as far as romantic or sexual interest. It's a common theme in certain types of anime and manga, and like most recycled anime tropes, it gets annoying very fast. Void Dark's sister, Lisa Rota, died because she got in the middle of a fight between him and the main protagonist, Killia, and he's taking over and destroying countless worlds in order to gather enough power just to bring her back to life. That's the story. What makes this guy even more disappointing is that even though he's given a ton of powers to use against you, he's probably the easiest main boss in the entire series as well, mostly due to Disgaea 5's feature creep giving you too many options to exploit the game's mechanics in ways that aren't possible in the earlier games. Oh, and notice how I didn't say final boss there? Yeah, that's right. He isn't even the final fight of the story. That spot gets stolen from him by his sister that he just revived, who gets corrupted by Void's dark energy and becomes the real final boss.
This is how our fight with Demon Emperor Void Dark's gonna end? This is super bullshit!
But it doesn't end there. After that, there's the post-game content where he admits that failing to learn some ultimate demon technique is part of why he became so bitter towards Killia to begin with, which is just like, wow, what a spoiled little shit. Then he joins your party, and I guess you're supposed to just forgive him for all the things he's done, because now he feels bad about it. I know this series isn't supposed to be taken seriously at all times, but come on. They struck a perfect balance of funny and serious with the first game, and haven't been able to capture that balance again since then. Even though Disgaea 6 was a step up from 5 in that regard, I can't help but worry about how Disgaea 7 will turn out because it looks not good. But I guess we'll have to wait and see in a few months.
No one will disturb us anymore. Let's destroy all the netherworlds and create a world just for the both of us.
Alright, steel yourselves. I'm about to spoil the whole goddamn Trail series, and I mean it. Everything from Trails in the Sky all the way through Cold Steel 4. So if you're not all caught up yet, feel free to skip this entry. With that out of the way, if you're still here, you probably know exactly who number 2 is. A character who was built up for a long time across damn near every single game since the beginning. A character that has always been a massive threat to the people of Zemuria, whether or not he has any screen time, Gileath Osborne. In some ways, Osborne is also a tragic villain. Despite not being of noble blood, the soul of the legendary hero and ancestor to the Imperial family, Drycols Rhysei Arnor, reincarnated within Osborne alongside a great curse that haunts him until the right time. Patiently, Ishmelga waited until he was around 40, when his home was burned down by a rival noble faction, killing his wife and gravely wounding his then 5-year-old son in the heart. Driven to desperation, he begs the goddess or anyone to somehow save his son. That's when Ishmelga appears before him. In exchange for his free will, Ishmelga will save his son by giving him Osborne's heart. In order to keep his son safe, he leaves him with an old friend of his, then resumes his position as Brigadier General. Even from the first Trails in the Sky game, where we never hear his name, he still plays a major role in many of the political events that happen between the Liberal Kingdom and the Erebonian Empire, such as being the prime negotiator to end the 100 Days War. Just prior to that, he was also responsible for investigating the tragedy of Hamel that started the war. These accomplishments contributed greatly to him being named Chancellor of Erebonia by the Emperor. As Chancellor, he strengthened the Empire from within militarily, and also expanded the country's borders via crafty opportunism and nonviolent intervention in nearby smaller countries, including the lucrative autonomous city-state of Crossbell at the end of Trails to Azure. He gains a lot of influence due to his actions, but also makes a lot of enemies, which culminated in him being assassinated in Trails of Cold Steel 1, shot through the heart by the Imperial Liberation Front. Moments like these, and the fact that his chancellorship comes with many benefits to the people, while his enemies appear to be far more sinister or corrupt than he is, it really makes you question whether or not Osborn's actually the villain in this story. Of course, the twist is that he was shot through the heart, but remember, his heart was given to his son, so he naturally survives, and comes back at the end of Cold Steel 2 to reprise his role as Chancellor, and also reveals himself to be the real father of the main character, Reen.
I am your father.
It's not until the end parts of Cold Steel 3 where Osborn really shows his hand and commits some actually heinous acts on screen, such as manipulating the story of the Emperor's assassination into a justification for war on a continental scale. Then, working alongside one of the most evil characters in the story, Black Alberic, to plunge Erebonia into a state of accursed chaos. Though you do witness hints here and there that he still retains a sense of honor, and hasn't given himself completely to Ishmelga, but he's still side by side with the guy responsible for the most gut-wrenching scene in the Cold Steel quadrilogy. In Cold Steel 4, Osborn makes his moves to finally start the war with Calvard, but there's always the implication that he's stalling or holding back each time he could take action. You finally have a showdown with him at the end, in one of the best fights in the Cold Steel series, and he'll put up a fight no matter how much you prepare or grind beforehand, even on New Game Plus. And throughout this, even after he is defeated, he never loses his signature confident smile, as if he's perfectly content with everything happening and always knew how it would play out. Almost as if everything he had done up to this point was all for his son and the future he would live in. Because if not for the actions of Osborn, who was able to keep his humanity despite losing his heart and selling his soul to the devil, someone else would have taken his role, and possibly made everything so much worse. For someone willing to go down in history as the villain for the sake of his country and the only family he has left, really brings to mind a certain beloved antagonist of another series. So why isn't he number one? Personal bias, of course. However, there's also the consideration that Osborn ends up not being the true final boss of the Cold Steel series because he isn't really the villain. The true enemy is Ishmelga, so it's not really over until Ishmelga is purged from the world. Just a demon with demonic tendencies. A hollow antagonist compared to the rich and incredibly fleshed out life of the Blood and Iron Chancellor.
You have to go now, don't you?
I do. My time here has nearly run out. I'll forever be grateful we had this chance to finally meet as father and son.
Yeah. Me too.
As for Millium, Claire, Lecter, and Rufus, my loyal children of blood and iron, please tell them I'm sorry. Now farewell, my dear son.
Goodbye, Dad.
Before we get to my least favorite, I just want to mention I had a really difficult time coming up with 10 least favorite villains. Obviously there were some that I thought of immediately when I started making the list, but the majority of JRPG villains from my recollection are just kinda mid. Just there to serve a role and be the big bad with maybe a few things going for them, or against them. I do have some dishonorable mentions, but I'm kinda scraping to even include them here. First we have Spoiler from Xenoblade Chronicles. First it was Metalface, then it was Egil, who were both great. Then someone else steals the show, and even though he's a fitting antagonist, he just has a lame presence whenever he's on screen compared to the other two. Also that one guy from Future Connected sucks. Lusamine from Pokemon Sun and Moon. At least Guzma and Team Skull were somewhat entertaining, even if they were ultimately a joke. I found the main story in Sun and Moon to be very dull, just like the rest of the game, and Lusamine and whatever her last-minute team in the story was just shit. But it could just be my extreme prejudice towards this game talking. I really do not like Generation 7. Spoiler from Legend of Heroes Trails from Zero and Beyond. A character that has a massive personality shift when she's revealed to be working with a villainous organization. but I found her more interesting prior to that because she just turned into a cheesy sadist cartoon villain. But I'll give her the benefit of the doubt for now since we haven't seen the last of her yet. Gilbert from the Trail series. Multiple games, same joke.
One time is funny, 2 times is fucking annoying, no?
Blados and Chalice from Golden Sun Dark Dawn. They just suck. Because everyone in this game sucks. Not salty. Nope, not even a little bit. I'm not fucking salty! Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Do I need to say more? Probably not, so let's just move on. Just kidding. It's Mobius, of course. All of them. Well, almost all of them. Spoiler warning. I think Xenoblade 3 was the first time I played a game with a very serious, dark, and pessimistic story where the villains were the ones who betrayed the overall feel of the game. Every single time, and I mean every single time they showed up on screen, they destroyed the entire scene. Like the first time. It starts off right, with Mobius shooting the game's signature anime JRPG old man who dies as an entrance, then shows up with 2 of the game's side characters in his grip, in kind of a oh shit moment. And then...
Oi! Don't go stopping on my account! Get back to killing each other, come on! I thought that was your whole raison d'etre.
Oh, for fuck's sake, this guy is just a giant evil clown, isn't he? He then kills off these 2 characters and starts monologuing in the most cheesy, over-the-top villain way possible, acting like an evil clown while he could have easily won this encounter if he took it even the slightest bit seriously. I know this is not the only game that does this, but in this one, it was so much more noticeable, more obnoxious, and more inexcusable when you take into account the context of what's going on. Every single encounter with one of these Mobius fucks I absolutely hated. With some exceptions, they play out the same way. They monologue like shitty cartoon villains about how evil or sadistic or whatever they are. Your characters preach and virtue signal at them, they fight, and then the clown dies. What makes this worse is that half the time, we don't even get enough time to learn about them, and sometimes we don't even get to see their faces, which seemed like a deliberate design choice, so that they can be dehumanized as much as possible so you don't have any reservations about killing them. And speaking of design, what the hell were they smoking when they designed these shitty costumes? It's not like the series is a stranger to wild character designs, to be fair, but characters with bad designs used to be the exception, not the rule. What makes all of this even worse is that the whole idea behind Mobius isn't even a bad one at all. The main antagonist, Z, or Zed, was a being born out of humanity's collective fears and uncertainty towards the future, that hijacked a great deal of power to create an unchanging world. To that end, he recruits the souls of certain people who have a similar desire as he, and they become the consuls, all the other Mobius clowns we have to deal with throughout the game, and set up the world of Xenoblade 3 as a sort of eternal stage or playground for them, where they toy with the lives of everyone. Really not a bad concept, Hunger Games vibes and all that. Could have been a real deep subject they could have delved into with each of these villains, but instead, they're just like, it's Mobin time, and die. The way these characters were portrayed was just so disappointingly cringe, sucking any sense of danger or tension out of every scene whenever they appeared. N and M, who are basically the same person as 2 of the main characters, and Zed are the strongest exceptions to this. Zed himself is portrayed as a dry, calm, stoic manipulator type of villain, which kind of betrays the essence of what he is. But I guess he only shows his true colors at the end when he takes his final form, which is probably the worst final boss fight in the series. This battle was just a boring slog and can really be boiled down to a test of endurance. Doesn't help that the ending that follows made it feel like the entire story was pointless. Unless you see the ending of that DLC, I guess. Really becoming that kind of company now, huh, Nintendo? Fuck off.
I'm retarded?
What really hurts the most about all of this, and this is building on something I mentioned in my Protagonist video, is just how much this series' storytelling has become so disappointing and juvenile when it once was some of the best I have ever seen, with some of my all-time favorite video game characters. Yeah, that's foreshadowing, alright. But before we get to my number 1 favorite, here are some honorable mentions. Team Galactic and Cyrus from Pokemon Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. Probably the first time we got to see a truly diabolical villain with his eyes set on absolute destruction, and he actually puts up a decent fight if you're not prepared, unlike most villainous teams in the series. Spoiler from Disgaea Hour of Darkness. I mean, he's not really a villain, but his role as the antithesis of your main character and the final boss was incredibly well served. Kefka from Final Fantasy VI. I never finished Final Fantasy VI because I got majorly spoiled, but Kefka deserves a mention here because of all the batshit crazy things he pulled off that other villains only dream of. The Queen Beast from Drakengard. Not quite a JRPG, but is classified as such sometimes, and not quite the type of villain you'd expect from one, for sure, but it's one hell of a miserable spectacle. Shadow Lord from Nier. I don't consider Nier a JRPG, even if it comes close. Feel like I'm repeating myself somehow. But yeah, I won't spoil this one. Hargon from Dragon Quest Builders 2. Unexpectedly quite a savage psychopath despite his appearance as a children's cartoon villain. Everyone from Undertale. Is Undertale even considered a JRPG? I have no idea, but that's why its antagonists are in the honorable mentions. All of them. Count Bleck from Super Paper Mario. I mean, you have to stretch the definition of JRPG to insane degrees to even mention this game, but I want to anyway because Count Bleck honestly really surprised me. You should see for yourself. Lastly, Krelian from Xenogears. It's complicated. Play it yourself. Are you ready for number 1? I don't think you are. A little madness goes a long way when it's done right. My favorite JRPG antagonist, and possibly my favorite video game character of all time, is Albedo Piazzolla from the Xenosaga trilogy. Easily the best, most memorable scenes from all of these games all have something to do with this guy. He's completely broken, highly intelligent, extremely powerful, beyond sadistic, and also, by some cruel twist of fate, immortal. More on that later, but it's a combination of traits that makes him not just intimidating, but utterly terrifying because there is no line he won't cross, especially when it comes to tormenting his estranged brother Rubido. If you haven't played these games, or at least watched the story from start to finish because they are hard to find now and it seems like Bamco will never re-release them, I strongly recommend experiencing this trilogy's amazing story for yourself first before you watch this. Albedo only briefly appears in the early parts of Xenosaga 1, but once he makes himself known, he steals the show, without a doubt. The first major thing he does is blast his way through tons of ships and Gnosis, showing us just how powerful and psychotic he is. Then, he abducts the young girl Momo, one of our main characters. What happens next is one of the most disturbingly and brilliantly twisted sequences ever seen, crossing the line so far that this scene was heavily censored in both Japanese and Western versions of the game, in different ways, such as the way he decapitates himself. For some reason, Albedo really enjoys torturing and abusing these artificial young girls that all look like Momo. We'll get to that later. When Rubido shows up to rescue Momo, Albedo continues abusing her, seemingly just to get a reaction out of him until he unleashes his power, and there's a reason for that too. Later, he uses his newly found weapon of mass destruction to destroy a lot of the Federation's ships, killing a ton of people yet again, and threatens to use it on the capital of the nearby planet Miltia. All this, seemingly just to goad Rubido into doing what he wants, but he keeps being overly vague about it. In Xenosaga 2, that's when we get to unveil the mask. The first thing we learn is that Rubido and Albedo were once conjoined twins at the heart of all things. So part of Albedo's heart is inside Rubido. Both of them were URTVs, bioengineered superweapons, but both of them developed their superhumanity in different ways, such as Rubido never aging, which is why he looks so young despite being 26, and Albedo's infinite regeneration and immortality. Turns out, Albedo considers his powers a curse, from the moment he learned that one day his twin will die and leave him alone for eternity.
If the body did not die, and the fears born in the mind just continue to pile up, the world would be nothing more than an eternal prison.
He also deeply resents a girl named Sakura, who fell in love with Rubido when they dive into her mind, which is a big part of why he found so much joy in abusing those girls and Momo in the first game. They were all modeled after her. Then there was the disaster on the planet Miltia, where Rubido screws up and gets most of his fellow URTVs killed, and Albedo gets exposed to the supernatural waves of Udu, granting him more power as well as furthering his descent into madness. All of this is somehow learned in fragments while inside the mind of Momo, which was a result of Albedo's intrusion into her psyche in the first game. He provokes Rubido one more time, which causes Momo to go haywire, allowing him to collect the Y data he needed from her mind, then disappears into particles. Albedo doesn't show up until the very end of the game, right before the final fight, when he gets tossed aside by the Space Pope and turned into particles again, seemingly enjoying every second of it. After Space Pope is defeated, he is brought back by the Testaments and begins to absorb near infinite Udu energy from the Zohar, and creates a massive space-time anomaly where the planet of Miltia and the Omega system they were on used to be. And then, he waits, calling to Rubido to finish their fight. Once there, Albedo conjures up twisted, defiled memories to continue to harass and torment Rubido as much as possible yet again. What comes next is a final showdown between the two of them, a symbolic fight to end the game on. Albedo is infinitely more powerful than Rubido, and will continuously attack, but won't let you die. This shows Albedo's true intentions all along. Everything he had done was all a means to find a way to truly die, and Rubido is the only one who could do it, because he is an anti-Udu weapon. It was such a heart-wrenching and beautiful end for one of the best characters ever made, ironically carried to the afterlife by angels that resemble those same girls he'd been abusing for so long, as if they had chosen to forgive him.
No, don't go! Albedo, don't go! Don't leave me alone!
Look, Rubido. I'm free.
But his story doesn't end there. The Testaments, characters who've been pulling the strings of fate throughout the story, are, for lack of a better word, undead beings. People with special circumstances brought back to life by Wilhelm to bring about eternal recurrence. Albedo becomes one of these Testaments at the end of Xenosaga 2. However, his role in Xenosaga 3 is very minor by comparison, but he does end up getting full closure with Rubido after they settle the score one more time, but this time with their brother Negredo, as well as their father, Dmitry Yuriev. It was a great moment for them, but nothing even close to the outstanding and outrageous moments we got to witness in Xenosaga 1 and 2. Bonus points for also having some of the best English voice acting by Crispin Freeman that perfectly captures the essence of such an insane character. Interestingly, it was his second ever video game role, and he nailed it to say the least.
Do you know what he said while he coughed up his lifeblood? Except a corn of wheat fall into the ground and die, it abideth alone. Wheat. There's enough of it. We can afford to waste as much as we want. Like my head, you see? What do you think, my beloved Pesh?
And there you have it. Those were my top 10 favorite and least favorite JRPG antagonists. I do hope one day we will see the return of batshit crazy villains that we actually get to witness doing batshit crazy things, but I won't get my hopes up. People have become way too sensitive these days, it seems. I knew exactly who my number one was going into this, as he's been my number one favorite villain of all time ever since I played those games back in 2012 or so. Hopefully you didn't spoil too much for yourself, but anyway, feel free to roast my choices in the comments section and let me know who your favorite or least favorite antagonists are. You might inspire me to try something I haven't played yet. You never know. I got no plans after this video also, so feel free to suggest something if you want to. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed it, or a dislike if you were salty. Subscribe for more occasional nonsense from me. Check out my other top 10 videos, like my JRPG Protagonists one if you haven't yet, or my top 40 favorite video game soundtracks, or my top 10 favorite moments in the Trail series. I do put much more work and thought into these top 10s than I really should, so I'd appreciate you checking them out. You can also follow me on Twitter, Rumble, Odyssey, and join my humble Discord server. Oh, and as always, have high standards, low expectations.